joining us. So, without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker. He's keenly focused on user experience and evidence-driven product development. He mixes and matches various methodologies to help teams deliver lasting outcomes for their customers. His blog, The Beautiful Mess, is one of the most widely read product blogs online, and he's a product evangelist at Amplitude. He's no stranger to product elevation either, having keynoted at our conference last year. So, ladies and gentlemen, delighted to welcome back John Cutler.
Yep. Hello. Thank you so much. Excited to be here. Let's jump right in. I think I've done a couple of events, I think in person too, in Dublin. This might have been like an Agile related one, but David and team have always been extremely kind to me. So I appreciate that a lot. Let's jump in. So today's topic, the title I picked at least is Focus Then Simplify. Tends to be a bit provocative as well, because people say, well, why don't we simplify? Or are you saying simplification isn't important? We're going to talk about that. But broadly, the topic for today is the importance of focus and coherence and clarity. And we're going to talk about simplification a little bit as we move along. So first, I'm not going to tell you too much more. I have a background in product management and UX, work at Amplitude as a product evangelist, where I meet with teams every day from around the world. That's very exciting for a product nerd like me. I love it. Get to help them be successful. Like, I'm an extension of Amplitude's product, which is exciting. But germane to the discussion today is that I deal with lots of teams who are talking about their strategy or trying to communicate strategy. We do a workshop called the North Star Workshop. I wrote a playbook called the North Star Playbook. And the secret with the North Star framework is that it's actually about strategy. It's very little about the trees and stuff that we create. So it's a little bit of a Trojan horse technique to talk about strategy. But suffice to say, it ends up that I end up talking to a lot of people about strategy and talking about how they communicate strategy. So the inspiration for today's talk is that I started to notice a pattern that played out over and over and over again. And it goes like this at the highest level, that someone, or, it's probably a pretty natural instinct on our part. There's some desire for simplicity. And yet that desire for simplicity impacts our ability to execute, impacts the outcomes that we have as a team. So there's something going on there that I was very curious about. One of the net effects of this desire for simplicity is that organizations often fail to engage their most passionate problem solvers. So this desire for simplicity works for some jobs in the company, maybe communicating things at broad scale, but it leaves the most passionate problem solvers unable to really understand what's happening. And it means that you don't engage them, which is a problem. So high level, I noticed a pattern over and over again. The pattern that I detected was that this desire for simplicity was actually causing these not great second and third order effects. One of the negative aspects of that is that it failed to engage problem solvers. And this is what left me very curious. So the goal for today's talk, I'm going to pick apart this particular problem. First, let me be clear, there is nothing wrong with simplification. There's many benefits to simple things. But my hypothesis is that it should come after focus, that we should seek clarity, we should seek coherence, not simplification, and that simplification and simplicity is a tactic, not a goal. So that's a lot of words, and I'm going to try to make this very clear and sort of actionable and tangible for you. But at a high level, I'm going to advocate for the idea that we should seek clarity and coherence before simplification. Let's jump in because it's a heavy-duty topic. Before we jump in, one more thing. This also maps a little bit my own career trajectory. I don't know if folks in the audience, if you've been told, stop your analysis paralysis, or keep it simple, stupid, or stop overthinking it. I've heard those things often in my career. Um, and I came to start thinking of myself as my overthinking or how I was thinking about it as being impractical. But I realized recently two things. One, the thinking was not the problem. Actually, it was a talent and it was a skill of mine. Maybe the presentation could have been improved sometimes when I was communicating about complex things, but there was no shame in thinking about things. So if you're someone in the audience who's been accused of being an overthinker or, you know, uh, just keep it simple, stupid, uh, this is for us as well. And the people that we work with who have to deal with us a little bit. So let's put that to the side. That's the heavy personal stuff. But let's jump in. So, what are the signs that this dynamic is happening? So, my favorite is that you arrive sometime in January or whenever your annual cycle is for your company, and there is a slide with 3 beautiful bullets on it, and everyone's nodding their head. And in some companies, they actually ask you to repeat those bullets out loud. I don't like that part. But then 2 or 3 months later, no one has internalized that strategy whatsoever. They were just words on the page. They seemed simple. They seemed, wow, this should be memorable, but it didn't really catch on. Another signal this is happening is this premature convergence on problem statements. So what does that mean? It means that someone in the room is, please define the problem. You know, to keep this project going, you must define the problem. The product manager goes away, hurry, in 2 seconds defines the problem. Okay, that looks good. Okay, move on. But no one really understands the problem. Another symptom are what we would call fragile agreements. You all go into a meeting, someone says, can you just boil this down to the simple points here? And someone does that dutifully. Everyone nods, and you leave the room, and 1 week later, nothing. There's this level of fragile agreement. You didn't really, the agreement you had was not very resilient. Other things that happen, or maybe your company is amazing at execution, but over time you seem to develop a level of strategic debt. So there's something off here. Another symptom is what we'd call shadow strategy, which is you have the made for television strategy that shows up at your annual conference or whatever, and then the shadow strategy that the executive, the CEO and a couple people understand. So these different, sort of inaccessible strategy. So these are some signs that to make this even more real for you. Someone was describing this to me recently that they had completed, a multi-month planning process. Everything seemed to work out great. And then 3 months or 2 months into the year, they were just back where they were before. Basically, what had happened is that all these executives and departments had lined up everything they wanted to get built. They had come up with these compelling statements. Everyone could squint their eyes and say, well, I guess that thing I wanted to build fits in. I mean, that's a pretty open-ended goal, delight customers. Sure. Why not? Let's just do this thing and it'll delight customers. And you go through this whole process and this whole theatrical planning process. And in a couple months in, everything's back to the way they were before. Nothing has changed. Business as usual happens just like it did the year before. The plan was simple, at least everyone could understand it, but it lacked bite. It didn't guide the team in any meaningful way. I don't know if anyone can relate to that. Certainly has happened to me in my career. It happens to many of the companies that I speak to. Just going through more symptoms. The other one is the justing problem. We just need to execute. We just need a simple thing to work. We just need to boil this down. And if you've heard that word just, it's a big signal here. It usually is a signal that someone is oversimplifying. And it might not be to positive effect. I mean, certainly sometimes simplification can be to positive effect, but once you start hearing the just language, there's something off about that language. Is it really just do that? Do you just need to execute and everything will be okay? That's another signal. Now, some problems, to be clear, are just problems. We just need to deliver by that date. Sometimes that's absolutely true. Most complex problems are not just type problems. So to wrap up, Does any of this sound familiar to you? Shadow strategy, fragile agreements, premature convergence, the mystery of the three bulleted slide, the 5 pillars or 3 pillars, all of that kind of stuff. And I would posit that if you're experiencing any of those, that one of the root problems is that there's putting simplification before focus. So hopefully this makes it more clear what I'm talking about, that the desire for a simple, removing all uncertainty, a simple statement of what's happening drives us to do these things that don't actually end up helping us, and our company loses focus. So why is this happening? Why does this dynamic exist? So the first thing is that if you're in product, we are under an incredible amount of pressure to simplify. We walk into meetings, pressure to get to the point. Everyone's short on time. We've got 5 minutes. Get to the point. Getting anything to stick is hard. So if you try to communicate something in product, you're going to have to communicate it over and over and over again. So, maybe if it's simple, maybe that's going to stick with people better. I had a boss, a CEO of a company that I worked for, that said if you can't explain it in a tweet, he didn't want to hear about it. So that's how short on time he was, and that's how much pressure there was to get that level of sort of simplicity and clarity. I would argue that he was asking for clarity. It often didn't feel like that. Another example is a product leader I met recently who carries basically in their back pocket a 90-second pitch to be ready to be prepared at all times because they'll only have 90 seconds. Another product leader recently is someone who's doing really well in their career, but was just intimidated by this leader gravitas that happens, right? Where you see these product leaders and they just, well, it's 3 points. You've just got to do this, this, and this. And you've got to, everything is just boiled down. So there's an incredible pressure just from a career perspective, from leadership, et cetera, to simplify. The funny thing here is that I think part of this is also our communication mediums. Has anyone been told, well, if it can't fit on a slide, I'm not interested in it? So you've got these magic 3, 4, 5 pillar diagrams. It looks like the Acropolis, or some, variation of that. All the annual planning has been boiled down to this one slide. You can read it in 90 seconds. And so the communication medium is putting a lot of pressure on us. Of course, you might read about Amazon 6-pagers or various things which try to buck this trend. But in large swaths of the corporate world, if it doesn't fit on a slide, it's never going to be communicated to anyone. And so another thing, this pressure to simplify is intense. Focus is also very painful. It's scary. No one ever gets fired for doing stuff and shipping stuff, right? But when you focus, if you just try to do it all, you can always make the excuse, well, I tried to do it all and we didn't quite hit that goal. But if you try to focus, I am making a big bet that if we focus here, we'll win. That sets yourself up for criticism. That could be a career-ending move for lots of people. So it's pretty major. My favorite example here is I have a friend who their vacations never work out because they go on their vacation and they just try to do everything and anything. They want to go to the best restaurants in Italy and hike and swim and then go to Croatia and then, do all these various things. And whenever they finish their vacation to a T, their description is, well, maybe we overcommitted on that vacation. I wish we had just spent a week hanging out in an Italian town and soaking it in. Yet they fall for this over and over and over again. Another good example are founders of startups. The minute that you mention to them that maybe they shouldn't say that their total addressable market is billions and billions of dollars, that these customers are where they're going to focus, their threat mechanism goes up like, oh goodness, well, I don't know. I mean, but our market is that big. I don't want to say that we're going to focus there and say that our market doesn't exist. So you can see the incredible pressure to generalize. Focus is very painful. And this extends to that I think leaders are also justifiably worried about analysis paralysis. I've certainly felt that in my career, where in the balance, if you have a team that's doing nothing and is stuck in an analysis cycle, nothing is happening. And so the alternative of that is you could be doing something. It's not quite the right thing and you're making forward progress. So there is a heuristic here where I think leaders are, analysis paralysis is their kryptonite. This pervasive fear that their team is going to get stuck in complexity. Their worst nightmare is anyone second guessing the strategy or not getting buy-in to what they're doing. And so another layer of pressure, this creates this pressure for these sort of memorable, simple things that defeat analysis paralysis for what they're doing. Finally, complex things cause a lot of cognitive load. My analogy here is the junk drawer. Does everyone have in their house, you have that one drawer that you keep all the junk in it. And whenever you open it up, it kind of makes your head hurt a little bit, but then you happily just close that junk drawer. Mine has batteries, various like utility knives, and then rubber bands, and etc. It makes my head hurt, but I put it back in the junk drawer. The equivalent here is I did an activity with a team. The CEO walks in. This is over Zoom. And the team has listed out, 50 assumptions underpinning what they're doing. The minute that the CEO sees the list, you can see the blood boiling in her head, right? And they said, I can't look at this. I can't look at it. And the team member said, well, it's true. Whether you want to look at it or not, this is the assumptions we're dealing with. That meeting got shut down very, very quickly. I had to do a lot of damage control to prevent that particular thing going very wrong. But you understand these complex things cause load. So let's just recap. We talked initially about the dynamic I'm talking about, and I'm going to present these, 4 basic reasons why it happens. There's strong pressure in corporate environments for simplicity. There's lots of constraints around communication just in terms of time and form factor. That's the slides. Focus is painful in our personal lives and professional lives. It involves taking a big risk. And analysis paralysis, this fear of it is both justified, but it's extremely prevalent as we're working. So probably at this point, you're saying like, I get this. This seems very, very theoretical still. But simple is always better. I'm a programmer, and if I can keep it simple, that will always beat a more complex solution. Maybe you're thinking, well, the goal of product really is to simplify. Look at Steve Jobs. There's a quote that Steve Jobs gave about simplicity too, that it's an output, not an input, but we'll get to that afterwards. You may think that analysis paralysis is kryptonite. And so you maybe agree with what I'm saying, but say, well, I've been told my whole career that I should seek simplicity in everything I'm doing, that I'm told the product manager's goal is simplicity. Well, I'm going to keep trying to chip away at that particular belief. So I want to take a thought exercise to start explaining this and have something a little bit more visual for you to look at. So I'll do a thought exercise for a second. And I want you to imagine on the left, you see this very messy collection of personas. So let's say this is reality for a second. Now on the right, you see what the natural tendency is when you do that. You would create 3 high-level groups. You might say, well, we've got a cluster here, a cluster there, and a cluster there. Any team that's developed profiles or personas can understand. Reasonable enough. If you only walked into meetings with what's on the left, people's heads would explode. But, so there is some desire to simplify here, which is what we see on the right. But note how different people respond when you do that. So imagine you do this. Imagine you get rid of all the mess and you go and you start telling the team, well, we've got 3 personas. So what happens? Some of the people will believe that. They'll say, well, we have 3 personas. Now, some of the people know it's more complex. They know that the mess is behind these, but they're also pragmatic and they understand, well, we can't operationalize all those personas. We're just going to have these 3 personas. And one group ignores the simplification to begin with. They've internalized the mess in their head, and that's what they're working with. So maybe this makes it a little bit more clear, and it starts to click here, is that you need a path back from the simplification to the mess. Otherwise, you're going to lose your most passionate problem solvers. People are going to join your company and they're going to say, well, there's just 3 personas. And then, 1 year later, you've lost 30% of your staff or 20% again. And people are going to even believe those 3 personas exist even more and more. And collectively, you're going to start this sort of form of organizational forgetting that happens if no one can trace this thing back to the mess. It's extremely interesting. New person joins, you see the 3 personas, that's it. Now compare that to someone who sits down with you and says, look, you're starting, this is the 101 level, we've got 3 personas, but in fact, there's this mess of personas, that's the 501 level. When you're ready, I'll be ready to teach you more about that, etc. Now, here's the problem. Your company gets dumber and dumber and dumber. It's a wicked loop unless you give people a way back to that mess. People start to believe the simplifications that you create, and over and over, that feeds into itself, and you end up with a dumber organization. Not because people are dumb, but organizationally, you've lost that awareness of the space that you're dealing in. And it becomes an absolute wicked loop. This is especially evident when you have new executives join. They talk to the people working for them. And a year later, they still believe there's only 3 personas. They don't understand that the issue is a little bit more complex than that. As this goes and goes and goes, it creates the wicked loop. And progressively, I believe that's very damaging for an organization. So here's the reality with it, and this is how I like to think about it. You cannot simplify a complex problem. Now, I know you probably think that's heresy. Like, no, of course you can simplify a complex problem. Let me explain what you're doing in your head when you say that. You're basically saying we can hold some assumptions constant. We can pick things to intentionally not pay attention to. All that is true. And maybe you could call that simplification, but you are not simplifying the underlying problem. You're simplifying your approach to the problem. There's a very interesting thing, there's this Ross Ashby has this idea of law of requisite variety. And basically it says that the complexity of the system needs to match sort of the complexity of the thing you're trying to control. Meaning that if you're trying to deal with a complex problem in product, you by definition need to sort of assume a complex working arrangements and working agreements on your team, because that's the only way that you can tackle that. You have to match the complexity of your approach to the problem. Simple approaches to complex problems will fail. That's why when someone says lay out your 2023 roadmap and list the exact estimates for everything you need to do, and what are your OKRs way ahead of time, just lay it down. That's a very sort of simple approach, but it will fail because the problems we're trying to solve are complex. It's an interesting idea. So Kat Hicks, who's a researcher, she's at Pluralsight at the moment, but from an academic background. I love this quote. She said, doing research with developer teams, something that really strikes me is how much people look for ways to make complex problems easy rather than make it easy to work on complex problems. Let that sink in. That is a brilliant statement. So rather than make it easy to work on complex problems, she's basically saying that we're obsessed with simplicity, but that's poorly matched for the problems that we need to solve. Why don't we make it easier to approach these things in the appropriate way? So the idea here is that what would it look like if we were taking Dr. Hicks's advice? Because the simple comes from a good place. Like, I think the people who advocate for simplicity are probably trying to reduce cognitive load. They don't want to overburden their teams. I'm not arguing for a second that it doesn't come from a good place. So if we were to follow her advice, we would create an environment where there could be feedback loops, where there could be time to collaborate, where we could have data for what we're doing, where we could adaptively form working agreements to match the complexity of the problem. And this goes back to the topic that we have today. So if you think simplification first, you're going to miss that. If you think focus first or clarity first, we acknowledge that it's a complex problem and we agree that we're going to focus on parts of it or hold some things constant to be able to attack it. So it's perfectly in line with what Dr. Hicks talks about. The opposite of this is, well, I just need the simple plan right now. We're never going to be able to finish it. That is not conducive to working on a complex problem. An environment with feedback loops and adaptive environment where people have time to focus and do complex problem solving, that's conducive to what we're talking about. Example here, you've got team one. Team one goes extremely broad, explores, it embraces the complexity. So they do a design sprint, they explore, they go wide, and then they start to narrow, and then they strive for simplicity. That's requisite complexity or requisite variety, according to Rosling. So team one embraces the complexity and then creates simplicity. Now, let's say team two just says, well, we got a deadline. Just come up with a simple design, everyone. And we just got to keep a simple design going here. What's the first idea we have? Oh, that one. Okay, let's just go and do that. Which one will succeed in a complex environment? Team one will succeed in a complex environment. Team two will not succeed in a complex environment. And so hopefully the difference is sinking in here. Here is a visual that I think really, really explains what we're talking about. Because when I say focus, often people say, you mean simplify. Focus, you mean simplify. But focus is not a form of simplification. This picture really explains what I'm talking about. Now, imagine you create a pinhole in a piece of paper and you view this scene. You're blacking out everything. Now, look at this image and notice how they are focusing on one part of the scene, but they keep soft focus on the complexity that they're dealing with. They're not permanently kind of downsampling the image. They're reducing cognitive load, they are focusing, but they are doing it without simplifying and without sort of getting rid of the idea that they're working in a complex environment. This image, I think, is extremely telling when we think about the difference between focus and simplification. So to sum this up, one, you cannot simplify complex problems. The problem remains complex. You could certainly do things to kind of hold things constant or whatever, enabling constraints, but you're not making the problem simple. The next thing is you need to match the complexity of your approach to the complexity of the problem. This is why, project teams have trouble with product-oriented work. And as we learned with those two teams going through, one will do a lot better than the other team as you go through it. And so finally, I just wanted to hammer this phone. Focus is not simplification. It might reduce cognitive load, but it doesn't mean we're taking the complexity out of the problem. So what can you do? And then we'll jump to some questions. Hopefully some of this has made some sense as we're going through. First, you need to decouple the mess from the presentation. Now, if you've studied computer science or if you've done any of these things, you understand the idea that you have the data model and then you have how you present that to users. The data model might be really messy, but the presentation might be very, very simple. And so you might have different audiences who need to access your research and things that you've done, and you don't want to overwhelm them with everything, but it doesn't mean you need to couple these things together. You can keep a lot of messy research and messy Miro boards and all sorts of interesting things, and then it doesn't mean you need to present it to people in a complex way. The important part is that you're leaving a way to trace back. If someone curious comes to you and says, well, those 3 bullets that I saw at the company meeting, they're kind of helpful, but they're not super helpful. How do I show me the research? You can give them a way back. What you need to do is put yourself in the shoes of a new joiner. Someone joins your company and looks at that model and is curious, where would they get more information? And part of this too is that you have to resist the idea of these unified models you use in your company. So we just have 3 personas, or the 3 goals for next year are X. Like, okay, you might have 3 high level goals. It does not mean that you need to throw away all the strategies that go into those particular goals. The next thing is to acknowledge that simple, as in a simple interface or something that's simple and easy to use or something that is maintainable, there's many valuable things about simple, but simple takes a lot of work. It takes a ton of work. And so you need to create the space to discover simplicity in your solutions versus thinking you can solve that by walking into it with simple problems. If you've ever written copy, or if you've ever designed an interface or something, my analogy here is I walked in and talked to a designer on our team, and they had 50 Figma panels or whatever they call the thing in Figma. And all of that work was there, all the research, and then the final product was the simplest looking interface. And that should tell you something. Simple takes a lot of work. The next thing is to be intentional about what you're doing. So sometimes the argument for simplicity is, well, we need to appeal to all of our customers, or we need something that all of our customers can understand. Therefore, we need to simplify it to make it more accessible. That is okay, but it's important to be intentional about when you're doing that. So when you are striving for simplicity at maybe the expense of detail or quality or anything of those things, it's important to be intentional about it and say, well, we're going to present these 3 bullets at the all hands meeting in January. The goal of these bullets is not to give everyone a deep knowledge of everything that's happening, but it's to give them 3 memorable things. And then we will support that with more research. We'll support that with more things that they're doing. The next thing is that your job as a leader is clarity and coherence and focus. And that's really the crux of this particular, discussion here, is that I'll give you an example. At Netflix, I mean, Netflix is having the problems that they're having right now, but I think, at a certain point, someone said that the goal at Netflix was to be HBO faster than HBO could be Netflix. Now, that is the simplest statement, but it is incredibly coherent. It means your most passionate problem solver could dig your head into that statement, and it could inform thousands of decisions that people need to make. It's simple, but highly coherent. It's very, very clear. And so I wanted to present that because often leaders feel like they're in a pinch and they feel like, well, I've got people asking me for the simple story. It's kind of your job. You are in the clarity business. You are in the coherence business. And so, seeking that level of clarity is your job. So finally, I wanted to leave you with this. My basic premise here is that first focus, then simplify, right? So you've got a complex problem. You've got to maybe it helps to focus on part of it because it would be difficult to focus on all that complexity at once. And then maybe towards the end of the effort that you're doing, you start working on the simplification aspect on it. 2, absolutely simplicity is a good thing. But it emerges from clarity and coherence, right? It's not something that you start with. It could even be a good principle for your company. Like, well, we've got a principle that simplicity is better than whatever. That's fine. But how many people look at that statement and don't really understand what you mean by simplicity? Are you meaning optimized for, 10-year-old reading your content or using your product? Does it mean simplicity in terms of usability? You have to be a little bit more clear if you're going to do that. So simplicity is a fine thing, but it emerges from clarity. And then always make sure to leave a path back from the simple thing to the complex thing. So that's what I have for today. I'd be interested in answering some questions. Hopefully this made some sense as we were working. And let me stop sharing my screen.
Okay, so thanks very much, John. Fantastic talk. So, folks, we're just going to open it up for questions. So, to ask a question, please just use the chat function in YouTube. We do have a couple of initial questions we want to ask you, John. So,
Yeah.
it seems that a team converging too early reduces odds of succeeding in a complex environment. Would you have any advice for influencing leaders of the advantage of divergence?
Well, I think this is an issue where you have to show, not tell, because remember, in other parts of your company, are not necessarily as complex. And these might be the worlds that they're used to. I mean, look, I work on a marketing team and you have to ship marketing campaigns and there are deadlines and there's lots of, things that are not transactional, but that marketing teams have done 1,000 times over the last couple of years. There's less of that type of thing. So I think that the main element here is you're not going to win the theoretical debate with the leader. You're not going to say, well, but this is a, complex environment. And if, you can't harsh my style or whatever, right? I think the only way you can win in this particular situation is just clearly lay out the risks, clearly lay out, keep reminding people of the goals, start with the why of what you're doing before the way, like why are we doing these methods instead of we have to do design sprints or we have to do research. Keep people, I think that if you can, and then reiterate, I think one clear actionable thing I would leave you with is, let's say that you're unsure about something and that uncertainty is impacting your ability to make a decision. It's much more important to go to that leader and say, well, right now, at the moment, in order to make a decision about this and this, we have to really dig into the uncertainty here to make a good thing. That's a way, at least you're explaining the decision that you need to make versus going in and saying, if you just empowered us and if you just let us do what we want, this would be better. One is much clearer and to the point. The other one is kind of hand wavy to do it.
Yeah, I really like the mantra of lead with the why, not the way. I think
Yeah.
it's a good starting point for sure. So yeah, seeing a couple more comments coming in the chat and questions as well. I think Raphael, you were saying we cannot simplify the problem, but we need to simplify the solution by understanding deeply the issue. Absolutely. We do have a question as well. So, how do you evaluate the right level of complexity? Um,
Well, I think
yeah.
that that's an interesting thing where there's not necessarily a right or wrong level of complexity. If you're tackling a problem, there's a sort of inherent complexity in that problem. I think then the question might be more like, how do we make progress against that?
Mm,
So if you have a completely thorny problem that drives people insane and their head, spins all the time, usually the right level of complexity is, so you've got the inherent complexity in the problem, and then you have basically, by focusing, by applying enabling constraints, by picking a part of that problem, by holding things constant, how can you find the right level? And so I
mm,
think that the real clue for the right level is a little bit about that kind of cognitive load that exists. It gets to a point where you need to boil the thing down in order to make some progress. And so I would say that the right level of complexity is something that fits the kind of uh, that allows forward progress without completely sacrificing, the thing. And I'm trying to make this very real for people. But if you had, let's say, 8 different personas who use an onboarding workflow and they all have different goals and they all have different things that they want out of your product, here's a couple ways that you could do it. Oversimplification would be like, we just need the onboarding flow. Come on, like just build this. That's
mhm.
on one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is we've got 8 different personas and we need to do research about all 8 of those personas, and they could want many, many different things out of the product. And you're going down the rabbit hole. And some people I think might want to do that, but they go down the rabbit
Yeah,
hole and then their head starts to like implode a little bit. And what you're
yeah,
looking for is you're looking for that person to say, it's actually impossible to make all 8 people happy with this onboarding flow. I am
mhm,
deciding to create an enabling constraint and say that we're focusing on these users and we're going to try to make their onboarding experience delightful. or effective or whatever you want to call it. And so that hopefully that gives an example. One end of the spectrum completely, will mess things up. The other end
Mhm.
of the spectrum will make your head explode. And you're trying to find that kind of sweet spot of holding
Yeah,
enough things constant without kind of making the thing useless.
that makes sense. And thanks for the question. So just another one has come in there. So how do you deal with people trying to simplify, but do not themselves understand the complexity and what they're trying to simplify?
Well, this is the age-old managing up problem. Um, I think this is about kind of now what I've learned in my career, at least, is this is not about going in and showing them the Miro board with 1,000 stickies on. That does not work.
Mhm.
You don't prove it to that person by showing how much thinking you've had to do. Does not work. I think that the point here is kind of like the first question. You need to list some of the decisions, maybe a couple areas. You need to simplify your version of the complexity to make it easy for them to access, right? So
Mhm.
you need to think about what are some of the key decisions that kind of expose the areas of uncertainty, maybe simple things like a causal loop or something that gets them thinking about the fact that it's a little bit nonlinear in that situation. um, you know that's an art to do that, but I think that this is the main point I want to make here is you will not persuade them by showing them how much thinking you've done. That's actually kind of
Mhm.
threatening and will get you the wrong response that you're hoping for.
That makes sense. We'll just take a couple more. I know, Raphael, you had a question. So how do we approach the stakeholders who are trying to simplify the problem by skipping important phases of the research process? So it sounds like they're trying to maybe take shortcuts to research.
Yeah, this is sort of the same kind of question, right? Which is, I think, well, first of all, you need to put yourself in their shoes. They probably don't know what you know, and they probably don't. They, this is where people in the product and design community need to learn how to go toe to toe on a business level with these folks of explaining it.
Mhm.
So if realistically this person is thinking like, oh, like we can just skip that. We kind of know, let's just ship this particular thing. If as a product manager, as a designer, you can't go back and say, if we get this wrong, uh, not only will it impact the time that we've invested in it, but it could have these business, like these are the business ramifications of doing that particular thing.
Mhm.
That's where you need to go with some folks, is that I don't think you're going to, you don't, it's not going to be some kind of like rational debate about why research or research phase is important. It's going to have to be kind of a business discussion about saying that. So maybe the business discussion could say like, well, I understand right now that you feel that we should skip this because in your mind, maybe um, you don't see this level of uncertainty and that maybe the cost of getting it wrong is minimal. I'd like to challenge that a little bit and say the added expense of doing a week or two of research is more than offset by how we're going to reduce uncertainty here and our ability to be able to drive this. If we can drive adoption of this feature to 60% versus 20%, do you remember that last feature we shipped that everyone was certain about and thought everyone was going to use, but only 10% of our customers used? We don't want that to happen again, do we? Question mark. So like this is where you have to play the game a bit to do that.
Yeah, influencing skills I think come in there. So thank you, Raphael, and good to see you again. We'll just take there's one more question. So John, you spoke about annual planning being boiled down to one slide, which I'm sure a lot of our community are familiar with. Have you seen better ways of doing that?
Well, I think that the main thing is that what is the job of that one slide? Now, realistically, if you put your the shoes of the CEO on, or if you whatever, there is a job to relay some high level messaging to people. So I wouldn't say that the one slide is wrong. It's just incomplete. And so I think that what you might want to do in that particular situation is think of this as a sort of progressive disclosure. So maybe those 3 bullets are good, but where can I find the one pager on each of those bullets? Where can I find like the facts, assumptions, and beliefs underpinning that? And so you think about it that like you will overwhelm everyone in your company if you go into the big company retreat and then have, 75 slide deck about all these things. But I think it's about hinting that there's more out there, making this accessible to people when they need it. And then, and also striving for that level of clarity. I gave you that Netflix example. Like it really matters what you put on that slide. So if basically the whole company looks at that slide and yawns and says, well, tell me something I didn't know, you got a big problem. So nothing wrong with the single slides, with the bullets, with all the things. You have a bullshit test to pass immediately with that. And the bar is not set at the least experienced people on your team. It's set with the more experienced people on your team. And then you also have to be ready to decompose those where people can access more information about it.
Okay, great. So thanks again, folks, for the questions. We will finish up there. Just conscious of everyone's time. John, just if people do have follow-up questions, where can they reach out, or where can they find out more about your work?
Yeah, you could, connect on LinkedIn. That would be good. You can answer some questions, or Twitter if you happen to use that. John Cuttlefish, Cutle Fish. Yeah, that's usually the best way to think about it. I know this was like a bit theoretical, but once you see this problem, you can't unsee it. So go into your next couple weeks, especially during the annual planning process, and stay aware of this, and then hit me back on LinkedIn as you start to notice these things. And and my employer like encourages me to do these talks. I didn't mention Amplitude the whole time, but think Amplitude on Twitter or something, and then they'll see it and they'll be confident I spent my morning doing valuable work to do that. So
No, that's brilliant. Thanks a million, John. So